is interesting because we have a lot of people saying, and I want to be clear on this, yes, it's great if Wall Street's involved. A lot of people mistake that and think, well, we need to have this legitimacy and we need to ask for more regulation. And I'm very much of the opinion that that is not a good idea. There's a lot of well-meaning people in our space who say, hey, we want more regulation. We saw some of them in the New York hearings with Superintendent Lasky, and they literally said, we want regulation. And I think what they really mean is they want clarity. And what clarity means is, what we're really saying is, please don't come and cage me, handcuff me, take my property, and take my freedom and destroy my reputation because I'm using math. And I say, who do you think you are? Who are you to take my freedom because I'm using math? You know? The regulators have absolutely no moral authority to arrest us and cage us because we're transmitting math to people. If I stand up on this stage, I can speak Shakespeare or tell jokes or sing a song, you wouldn't want that. Or I can say capital H, lowercase g, blah, 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 and read out a code. No one has the right to handcuff me and cage me and seize my property for that. They have absolutely no moral authority. And people in our industry who are well-meaning say, well, we want them to do this because we're afraid that if we don't ask for the regulation, that they're going to come down on us harder. Wrong. That is not a legitimate moral authority to ask for regulation. The legitimate role of government is to protect people who are victims of crimes, period. Protecting life, liberty, and property. Not saying, because we're afraid that they're going to hurt us, harm us, cage us, take our freedom and property reputation, that we're going to ask them to do it. That's like saying, I'm afraid that somebody may steal my wallet, so I hope I get mugged on the way out of the building. It doesn't make sense. And the reason I have these opinions is because, unlike some of our well-meaning colleagues in this space, I've actually lived under these regulations. I know what it is like to be a registered financial professional. I've lived it for 22 years. And it is some of the most anti-business, anti-competitive, ridiculous procedure that is burdensome, that enriches people's power and systems, and does very, very, very little to prevent fraud. It does a great deal to burden the honest people. So we have these regulations like Sarbanes-Oxley, and we have a problem with enforcement and lazy regulators who are too lazy to enforce the laws use regulation as an excuse. They were too lazy to chase Bernie Madoff, who, by the way, if you look at most bios of Bernie Madoff and you look at the media, they refer to Bernie Madoff as a fraudster, when he was. I refer to Bernie Madoff as chairman of the regulatory body, who was also a fraudster. People forget this. Bernie Madoff was chairman of the NASD when the NASD was the main authority over all stockbrokers at all brokerage firms in America. Bernie Madoff was the chairman. They don't like us to remind them of that fact. And he is living proof that regulations do very little to stop the worst actors in our space. Because people like Bernie Madoff, if you say, follow these AML compliance procedures and add 10 pages to your prospectus, it doesn't matter because they're creating a fake prospectus. So the burden is on the honest people, all of these wonderful people here trying to start businesses who have to expend thousands and thousands of dollars to deal with regulations. So the honest people are the ones who are going to have to follow this kind of stuff. So they forget that no matter how well-meaning a law or a rule or a policy, no matter how well-meaning it is, at the end of the day it is enforced by violence. And I don't feel that I have the moral authority to do violence against somebody else unless they've done violence against us. I've never seen a Bitcoin stab anyone, and therefore I don't think that we have the moral authority to do some of these regulations that people are talking about. And we've become so conditioned in this country that we ask for permission that it's kind of a given. People say, I'm going to create a new business. The first thing I'm going to do is go to regulators and lawyers and ask if I'm allowed to transmit meth. I've met CEOs who describe their job as, my primary role is to keep out of trouble with the regulators. I beg to differ. Your primary role as a CEO is to solve a problem that consumers want. So we've done this entire shift that is really, really out of line and out of whack. And what is the excuse for it? Charlie Shrem? That's it? That's what you've got? A guy who had a service that enabled people to buy bitcoins that was used by a guy who likely put them at Silk Road where they were likely used to buy drugs? That's it? How many jobs is that worth? I'd like to ask Superintendent Lasky, is that worth 1 million jobs? The best and brightest in our country, the people who backed companies like Facebook, think that this is the next big thing. They think that this is going to be the thing that's going to help our economy and provide thousands of jobs and thousands of new companies. So how many jobs is it worth to stop a guy who dealt with a guy who dealt with a guy who maybe bought drugs, which, by the way, some states have legalized. So we have to think. In the New York hearing, Superintendent Lasky said it's not worth having 1,000 flowers bloom to stop if we can stop one money launderer. I disagree. You've got to have a balance in place. You've got to have a balance in place and say, what is it worth? Because people have alluded to this saying, Bitcoin is like the Wild West. Well, they should open a history book, because the history books tell me the Wild West wasn't that wild. The movies have more murders than the real Wild West did. Shootout at the OK Corral, what, 4 people? That was news for 100 years. It was such big news. The Wild West wasn't that wild. But what we did have in the Wild West is great growth. And that's part of the fundamental piece of who we are in America. And we have to say, yeah, there's a price to pay. Does Bitcoin make life easier for criminals? Does Bitcoin make life easy for criminals? I'm going to make it easy for the regulators. Yes, it does. Absolutely it does. You know why? Because it makes life easier for everyone. That's what new technologies do. That's what mobile phones do. That's what shoes do. That's what cars do. Cars make life easier for criminals. Should we ban cars? Should we ban phones? Should we ban shoes? No. We need to have a balance. And I would have thought that me being a kind of conservative member of the financial community, I would have thought I would have been on the other end of the spectrum, saying, hey, we've got to be more mainstream. But sadly, there are very few voices in our community who are saying this kind of thing. So I mentioned Rami at the pizza house. And after I bought the pizzas, I said, why are you doing this? Why did you decide to become the first guy in the UAE to accept Bitcoin? And he's an American, Palestinian relatives. He's had interesting experiences in his life, and he answered with almost the exact words that Roger Ver, who, if you don't know him, you should definitely check out his videos and read his story. Roger Ver said in Miami. Rami said, Bruce, 30% of his business, I think this might work. 70% is because I think this technology can make the world a better place. And the more power that we as a people have, the less power the governments will have to bomb people and kill people. And that is a valid goal. Thank you.